He returned to his grandfather's ranch. After his death, what he found in barn changed everything. The frost had not yet melted when he stepped out of the truck. Morning light rolled in slow, brushing the frostbitten fields with a pale silver hue. Nothing moved. Not the grass, not the barn doors, not even the wind that used to whistle low through the cottonwoods. Everything stood still, like the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for him. His boots crunched over the frozen mud, the sound sharp in the silence. He didn't look up at the house. Didn't need to. The paint had already started to peel before his grandfather passed. The porch still sagged on the left. The wooden swing hung crooked, limp in the still air. It was the same. Everything was, and yet it wasn't. He hadn't been back in 15 years, not since the shouting, the slammed screen door, and his grandfather's voice trailing behind him like a prayer that refused to die. You'll regret not learning where you came from. Boy, he was no boy now. His jaw clenched as he passed the porch. He could still hear the creak of his grandfather's boots inside. Still smell the black coffee burned into the kitchen walls. Time had settled here, but it hadn't softened anything. The fields beyond stretched quiet and wide, the kind of quiet that pressed on your chest. The kind of wide that made a man feel smaller the longer he stared into it. His grandfather once told him, "The land listens. It don't forget neither." His breath showed in clouds. The key turned stiff in the lock. The front door moaned open, not in welcome but in memory. Inside, the ranch house was colder than the frost. Dust clung to everything. Old photographs, rusted lamps, a forgotten hat on the coat rack. On the mantel sat a tin box with his grandfather's name carved in shaky lines. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he moved toward the back window, toward what pulled him in the first place, the barn. It stood like a shadow beyond the fields. Same weathered red wood, same stubborn lean in its roof. But something about it felt heavier now, like it had waited too long with something to say. A bird took off from the fence post, wings slicing the silence. He stepped back outside, walked slow toward it. The cold bit harder the closer he got. His boots sank into the thawing earth. His hand hovered on the latch, and for a moment he hesitated. Then a creak from within. Not wood, not wind, something moved inside. He opened the barn door, and everything he thought he knew about his grandfather and himself began to change. The town hadn't changed much, just older faces behind the same counters, the same cracked sidewalks leading to the same rusted signs. He didn't want to be seen, but news traveled faster than frost in places like this. By the time he parked outside the diner, they already knew. He stepped in, and silence met him like a slap. Forks paused mid-air. Conversation died before it could rise. No one said his name, but their eyes did, all of them, judging, measuring, wondering what a man like him was doing back at the old ranch after all these years. After what he did, or didn't do, he sat at the counter like a man carrying weight on his back, not a suitcase. The waitress, Lorraine, poured coffee with a trembling hand. She didn't meet his eyes. "Your grandfather's funeral was quiet," she said, voice low, like speaking of the dead too loud might wake them. He nodded once. "I wasn't invited." She didn't respond, just walked. Away, like someone who'd been holding something in too long and was too tired to let it out. Then came the voice behind. Him deep, cold, familiar. "Well, if it ain't the runaway grandson come crawling back for the scraps." He turned. Caleb Hart stood there in a sheriff's jacket that looked 2 sizes too proud, broad, bitter, and brimming with something uglier than grief. His grandfather's neighbor, the man who'd always wanted the land. "You didn't come for the old man when he was sick," Caleb said, stepping closer. "Didn't come when he broke his back trying to fix that damn fence. You didn't even come when he was dying in that chair. But now he's 6 feet under, and suddenly you're back. What changed?" He could feel the room leaning in. No one stopped Caleb. No one looked away. They just watched, quiet like sheep while the dog growled. He swallowed hard. "I didn't come for the land." Caleb's laugh was sharp, loud. "Of course you did. That's all people like you know how to come for. That barn should have been mine. Your grandfather promised it to me years ago. Said a man who abandons blood don't deserve dirt. Something twisted in his chest. He didn't flinch. He didn't rise. I buried him with my own hands, Caleb continued, while you were off chasing city lights and forgetting who raised you. That barn has more right to my boot prints than your name. The crowd said nothing. They didn't nod. They didn't look away. They just let it hang in the air like smoke. He stood slowly. I didn't forget who raised me, he said. I left because I couldn't face the man I became. For a moment, it was almost still again, until the door creaked. A boy's voice broke the hush. He didn't come for the land. He came because of me. Everyone turned. At the door stood a young teenager, lean, eyes like the old man's, holding a photograph in one hand and something older in the other, a pocket knife with initials carved deep. He's my uncle, the boy said, voice steady despite the tremble in his fingers. And my grandfather told me, he's the only one left who might still do the right thing. The room fell into a deeper silence. Even Caleb didn't speak. Only the clock on the wall ticked, loud, like a heart remembering how to beat. They didn't speak on the drive back. The boy sat beside him, legs pulled close to his chest, face turned to the window, like he was watching a world he didn't quite belong to. At the ranch, the house seemed older in the fading light. The barn stood still again, the creak from earlier now a memory, or maybe a warning. He parked the truck and waited, but the boy didn't move. Only after the engine died did the boy speak, his voice barely above the hum of wind through the trees. His name was Jesse, my dad. Your brother, the man nodded slowly. I know. He said you left because of him. The man's jaw tightened. He opened the door without answering. The boy followed, hesitant but not afraid. Inside, the house still held its silence like a wound. The boy drifted to the mantel, fingers brushing dust off the old photographs. He paused at one, a photo of 3 men standing in front of a tractor, one of them barely 18. He kept this? The boy asked. Never took it down, the man replied. They didn't speak for a while. The boy wandered the rooms, touching objects like memories. The man lit the fireplace, not for warmth, for presence. For the first time in years, someone else was in that house. And silence didn't feel like punishment. Later, they sat at the small wooden table, each with a bowl of soup, plain, reheated, but something about sharing it made it enough. The boy watched the man with cautious eyes. He wrote letters to you, he said, even when you didn't write back. I know. He never stopped waiting. The man swallowed hard. The fire popped. Outside, wind rubbed branches against the glass. The boy finally said, I didn't know where else to go. They said you were gone, but Grandpa always said you'd come back. He said the barn would bring you home. He looked at the boy now, really looked. Same chin, same way of hiding pain behind questions. But deeper than all of that, the same kind of loneliness. You hungry? The man asked. The boy shrugged, unsure how to answer. The man stood, opened a tin near the sink, and pulled out a jar of honey, homemade, labeled in faded ink. Your grandfather's favorite, he said, sliding it across. The boy stared at it. Then at him he took a spoon, scooped it, and tasted. His eyes softened. He used to give me this when I had nightmares. The man didn't smile, but something inside him settled, just a little. That night the boy fell asleep near the fire, curled under a blanket too big for him. The man watched him from the armchair, shadows flickering across both their faces. He didn't speak, didn't move, but before he turned off the light, he did something he hadn't done in years. He tucked the blanket closer around someone else, and for the first time since his grandfather's death, the house no longer felt abandoned. The storm rolled in 2 nights later, not the kind that screamed, but the kind that pressed its weight on the land like a hand over a mouth. Gray clouds stitched the sky shut. Trees stood still, windless, waiting. Inside the ranch house they moved with quiet purpose. The man brought in firewood, arms scratched with bark and old scars. The boy cleared the dust from the hearth, coughing softly, then hiding it like it meant weakness. They didn't speak much, not because they had nothing to say, but because words, once broken, take longer to build back than walls. The man fixed the broken hinge on the barn door with careful hands, testing the swing twice, then once more. The boy stood nearby, holding a rusted toolbox like it was an offering. When the man reached for a wrench, the boy handed it over without being asked. Later, in the kitchen, the boy chopped onions. Crooked pieces, uneven slices. The man didn't correct him. He just stirred the soup, letting the heat rise up like memory. The storm tapped gently at the windows. Not yet inside, but near. At dusk, the man lit a lamp and placed it on the table. Its glow cut through the dim, casting soft shadows that danced along the wood panels. The boy sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through old nails, separating the bent from the good. The man handed him a fresh cloth to wrap the usable ones. That night the power flickered once, then went out. They didn't panic. The man moved to the old closet and pulled out 2 thick blankets, tossing one toward the boy without looking. The boy caught it, hugged it close, then sat beside the fire, the light flickering over his face like a ghost's touch. Outside, the wind began to hum low through the trees. Not anger, more like mourning. The man opened a tin box. Inside, a letter unopened, addressed to him, written in his brother's handwriting. He stared at it, didn't touch it, didn't open it. Instead, he closed the box slowly and set it down. The boy had watched. He didn't ask. Just stood, walked to the shelf and picked up a tin mug. He filled it with hot water, added honey, and placed it on the table, not in front of himself, but in front of the man. A gesture, not a question. The man looked at the mug for a long moment, then finally lifted it, took a sip. The warmth hit him deep, not in his throat, but somewhere older. They didn't speak, but something loosened. In the morning, they worked on the fence, side by side, hands raw from the cold, shirts damp from breath. The boy held the posts upright, while the man hammered. When one post leaned too far, the boy braced it with his shoulder instead of calling out. The man noticed. He handed the boy his gloves. "No use freezing your fingers off," he muttered. The boy didn't smile, but he didn't argue either. By the 3rd day, the kitchen had rhythm again. One chopped, one stirred, one fetched water from the pump, one poured. No need for instructions, only motion, practiced, instinctive, shared. That night the man brought out an old harmonica. Didn't play it, just held it in his palm, thumb running over the worn brass. The boy watched, then leaned back, eyes half closed, as if listening for a song that never came. Silence had become their language, and in that silence, something unspoken passed between them. Not forgiveness, not family, but recognition. The first envelope came in the mail 3 days after the snow melted, unmarked, no return address. Just a single sheet of paper, folded clean, creased sharp. Inside, a notice of land dispute. Claimed violation of an old agreement, filed by Caleb Hart. The boy found it on the kitchen table, opened, the corners trembling under the weight of what it meant. "He wants the barn," he whispered. The man didn't reply. He just stared out the window, where the clouds gathered low again. The fence they had repaired still stood, but the soil around it looked bruised, as if it had absorbed more than footsteps. Later that day, a white truck idled at the end of the gravel road. Caleb didn't step out, just sat behind the wheel, watching through tinted glass, like a wolf waiting for dusk. The man didn't go to him. He didn't wave. He just walked back inside and bolted the door like his grandfather used to. Slow, deliberate, quiet. Inside, the house grew heavier. The boy spoke less. The man grew quieter. Their work slowed. Each step in the barn, each board nailed, each plank oiled, now felt like resistance, like an act of rebellion. That night, a storm returned, harsher, angrier. The wind shoved the windows. Rain clawed at the porch roof. The fire hissed and cracked, but didn't warm the room. The boy sat wrapped in 2 blankets, trying to read, but his eyes kept drifting toward the tin box on the shelf, the one with the letter inside. "Will he take it?" the boy finally asked. "If we don't fight, will he just take it?" The man didn't answer right away. He stood, walked to the window, and watched the barn through the glass. "I don't know," he said, "but you'll fight him." Right? The man closed his eyes for a moment. He had spent his whole life running from weight, from family, from expectations, even from love. But now there was a boy under his roof. There was silence that didn't hurt. There were broken things, yes, but also hands willing to repair them. He couldn't run this time. Not again. The next morning, he walked to town. Not fast, not armed. Just present. Caleb stood in front of the county office, leaning against the wall like he owned it. He smirked when he saw him. "You finally decided to talk?" The man didn't respond. He handed over a paper, handwritten, signed, dated. A claim, a counter-motion, a stand. "You don't scare me anymore," the man said, calm, clear. "This land isn't a prize. It's a graveyard of promises, and I'm not letting you dig through it." Caleb's smile thinned. "You think you'll win because the kid showed up?" The man stepped forward, not to threaten, just to speak. "I think I'll win because I stayed." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of years, of choices, of the kind of strength that doesn't shout but endures. Caleb didn't reply, didn't smirk, just walked past him. Stiff, bitter, small, back at the ranch. The boy sat on the porch, feet dangling off the edge, a blanket around his shoulders. "You came back," he said softly. When the man approached, "No," the man said, sitting beside him. "I never left this time." Together they watched the barn, its red walls bright against the pale sky. It still creaked in the wind, but now it sounded less like warning and more like memory. The hearing was held in the town's old courthouse, a building that smelled of pine dust and history. Light spilled through tall, narrow windows, slicing across the floor like judgment. No one clapped, no one muttered, just footsteps, paper, and breath. He stood on the left side of the room, alone. Caleb Hart stood across from him, flanked by two attorneys dressed like vultures. His face was calm, polished, but his eyes held something else now. Not confidence, not rage, something closer to doubt. The boy sat behind the man, not hiding, just present, like a memory that refused to leave. The judge, an old woman with weathered hands and clearer eyes than most, cleared her throat. "You're contesting a private will," she said to Caleb, "based on what you claim was a verbal agreement. Made years ago, with no witnesses and no paper trail." Caleb didn't blink. "We had an understanding. The barn was promised to me." The judge turned her gaze to the man. "And you?" He didn't speak right away. Instead, he stepped forward and opened the old tin box. Inside, two things: a folded letter, still unopened, and a photograph of three young men standing in front of a barn. "My grandfather never gave me many words near the end," he said slowly, "but he gave me this house, and this land, and something else too." He placed the photo gently on the desk. Then the letter. "I never opened it," he said, "because I knew whatever was inside. I already carried it with me." Caleb scoffed, but quieter now. The judge leaned forward. "And what exactly did you carry?" The man turned toward the boy for a brief second, not to seek strength, but to return it. Then he looked back at Caleb. "I carried the silence," he said. "The kind of silence a man leaves behind when he dies, not of regret, but of trust." The room stilled. Even the fans above had stopped spinning. Caleb stepped forward. "That's not proof. That's poetry." The man didn't respond to him. He stepped closer to the judge, picked up the letter slowly, and tore it open for the first time. The paper crackled. He didn't read it aloud. He didn't need to. He just read the first line silently. And a single tear slipped down his cheek. He placed the letter back in the box. Then he looked at Caleb one last time. "You don't deserve the barn," he said, voice quiet. "Sure, not because it was never promised to you, but because you never built anything inside it." The words fell like stone in water. Caleb looked away, not in anger, but in retreat. Sometimes shame arrives not with yelling, but with silence you cannot answer. The judge nodded once. Softly, "I have what I need." The gavel tapped. It sounded less like justice and more like closure. Outside, the wind had picked up. Trees bent low in the cold, but the sky was clearing. The boy walked beside him, shoulders tense but lighter. You didn't shout, he said quietly. The man didn't smile, but there was something softer in his eyes. I didn't have to, he said. He was already losing. Long before this, they reached the truck, parked beside the courthouse steps. Before climbing in, the man paused. He looked at the barn across the field in the distance, red, weathered, alive. Then he turned to the boy. You ready to go home? The boy nodded, and for the first time, when he said home, it didn't mean where the grandfather used to be. It meant where they were going, together. Spring came slowly that year, not in a burst, but in patient, quiet shifts. The frost melted inch by inch. Earthworms returned to the surface. The barn doors no longer groaned when opened. They simply sighed. The boy had grown taller. He moved with more surety now, hauling water buckets, fixing saddle straps, patching broken fence boards with hands that no longer trembled. He had found rhythm in the land, in the stillness, in the slow way mornings unfolded over the fields. The man had changed too, not in appearance, but in weight. There was something lighter in the way he stood on the porch each evening, eyes squinting toward the hills, as if searching for something he no longer feared. They rarely spoke of the court, or of Caleb, or even of the letter, now sealed again in the tin box, placed beneath a floorboard under the dining table, but they didn't need to. They had said what mattered, not in words. But in staying, the house had found its heartbeat again. Not loud, not hurried, just present. A mug of coffee on the railing, boots left by the door. Laughter sometimes, silence more often, but the kind that felt like peace. One evening, long after the snow had vanished, they sat side by side on the edge of the barn loft. Below them, the horses paced lazily, tails flicking against dust. The sun dipped slow over the trees, the sky bleeding gold into blue. You ever think about leaving? The boy asked. The man didn't answer right away. Then, I used to. Every day,